Hey everyone, I'm Jordan,
And I'm Maya.
and welcome back to Revisiting Menendez. It's been a long time, but we're finally back.
Yeah, it's been probably like a year since we've recorded anything, but we're happy to be back.
I made an Instagram post recently asking you guys what you would like to see, and the most common response I got was you wanting to see our response to all of the new information that's come out about the case in the past few months. So today we're going to be discussing the writ of habeas corpus.
Yeah, in the last year since we've recorded anything, probably the most legal action has happened in this case since like 30 years ago, probably.
Yeah, it's kind of insane, right? Like, thinking back to when we stopped recording, I could not have even imagined the case being where it is now. Like, it's kind of shocking.
It's pretty exciting, I would say.
But yeah, like, we'll be discussing the writ of habeas corpus, and I guess we should start by actually going into detail about what the writ actually is. Do you have, like, a baseline sort of introduction for what it is, Maya?
Yeah, so their lawyer sent a document to the district attorney's office saying essentially that the brothers should be released because there's new information about their case. And this is called a writ of habeas corpus. The idea behind it is that, like, at the time of the trial, the prosecutors were able to say certain things because like they didn't have certain information, but now there's new information, and that would have changed the outcome of the trial because it would have shown that the prosecutor was, not telling the truth about the defense.
Yeah, prosecutors, specifically in the second trial, people like David Conn, they specifically argued that the abuse was made up, that it was a fabrication. And so, with all the new evidence that has come out now, it sort of shows that David Conn was arguing based on a false premise. And for that reason, like, the brothers are imprisoned unlawfully.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty exciting because that has been sent to the district attorney, and they are being sort of forced to reconsider the case based on some of the new information that's come out. So there's two main things that have come out recently that are sort of the basis of this new evidence that is talked about in the writ. The first one is something that we've talked about before, which is the letter from Erik to his cousin Andy, which essentially corroborates the fact that he was being abused at that time.
The letter was backdated, right? Like, the letter itself sort of identifies when it was written, because I believe in the letter, Erik is speaking about a Christmas party that his dad is hosting for his work colleagues. And that Christmas party took place, I believe, in December of 1988.
Yeah. So the letter was written around 8 months before the killings. And in the letter, Erik tells Andy that the abuse is still happening and that he is like afraid of Jose coming into his room, and he's afraid of saying anything to anyone because Jose has threatened him. I don't think it specifically says Jose has threatened to kill him, but it does say like he's warned me about telling anyone.
Yeah, I believe he says something to the effect of, like, you don't know dad like I do, he's crazy.
Yeah.
Erik doesn't specifically mention abuse, as far as I'm aware, in the letter, but it is heavily implied.
Yeah, I mean, he says like every night I stay up thinking he might come in.
Yeah. I think Erik's testimony is, like, corroborative of itself, in that, especially in 1993, there is no way a random person who hadn't been abused in this way would speak about it in the way that he does. Like, there's just something about the way that Erik describes his relationship with his dad that comes across as completely authentic, and it's you have to watch it for yourself to understand that, is what I would say.
Yeah. There's a lot more information now that's like publicly available about how victims of child sexual abuse view their abuse. And the way that Erik talks about it is like consistent with what I would say is, like, commonly known now.
Yeah, what is known now, but was not really known back then.
Right.
Unless you were, like, Dr. Ann Burgess.
Even experts at the time were still learning and, like, recording information about CSA in a way that, like, now is much more thorough.
That also has made me think about, I remembered a part of a documentary, I think, from, like, maybe the late 2000s or early 2010s, where Carol Nahara is interviewed, and I think she's speaking about, like, the abuse allegations, and what she says is essentially like, so you're telling me these two 18 and 21-year-old men were being sexually abused by their father, like, these strapping, big, athletic young men, like, ugh. And that to me is the epitome of, like, the prosecution's strategy in trial 2.
Right.
When you picture, like, you getting into a confrontation with your own parents, even as a grown adult, we're both adults here, when I picture myself, like, getting into a confrontation with my parents, like, I feel like I'd always be subservient to them, just because in my head, like, they're always going to be the superior person in a way, because in my head, that's how I've always viewed them. They are my parents. It doesn't matter how old I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's me, a non-abused person. So I can't even fathom what, like, how Erik and Lyle would have felt about defending themselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way, where it's like, I still view my parents as, like, above me in terms of, like, their understanding of the world and what's right and wrong, and it's like, you know, I've lived out of their house for, like, 5 years. I'm still, like, going to them for advice and for, like, their opinion on things, and usually going with it. If you grew up in a situation where you were afraid of your parents, like, I feel like that would just be multiplied.
Exactly. That's a good point, actually. I don't think we've ever... Have we brought that up before?
I don't think so. It's crazy that there's still things we haven't brought up.
Yeah. So, something that we failed to mention previously when we were going over, like, the corroboration for the abuse is that, and this is kind of unrelated to this current episode, but, you know, we'll just go off on a tangent here, is that the parents were tapping Erik and Lyle's phone calls.
I think it was Kitty specifically.
Yeah, I think it was, right? But this was unknown to the brothers before the parents' deaths. I think a cousin found, like, the whatever it was that was, like, tapping their phone calls, and then he went to, I believe, Erik, and was like, did you know, like, your parents were tapping your phone calls?
I believe they found the tapes.
Yeah, like, they found the tapes, right? And I believe Erik and, like, a friend, like, sat there and, like, listened to all the tapes. That is very strong corroboration of abuse to me, because that shows a complete, like, lack of respect for your children's privacy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just gross as well. Like, could you imagine just one day, like, finding out that, like, your parents have been listening to, like, all of your phone calls secretly?
I mean, I think it's hard because they, like, didn't know about it at the time, but I think it is a good example of why the brothers were probably, like, justified in thinking that they had no privacy.
Yeah, like, the way the brothers felt about the parents, right, is that, like, they sort of knew everything about them at all times. Like, I think the way Erik described his mum is that he thought she had, like, magical powers at some point because she seemed to, like, know everything.
Yeah. I think it's more just interesting that, like, a lot of their intuition about their parents was actually right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, going back to the letter. Like, it's corroborative of the sexual abuse, but it's, like, also just generally corroborative of the family, because he does talk about, like, Kitty as well. It says, Mom isn't doing too good. It's like she's here physically, but mentally she's just, like, gone. She freaks out over nothing. I feel bad for her. I don't know why she puts up with Dad's shit. At times I wish I could talk to her about things, especially Dad and I, but the way she worships him and tells him everything, I'm so afraid she'll tell him whatever I say. That's, you know, exactly how the brothers described their family dynamic.
Yeah.
So when we talked about this letter in our Erik video, it was kind of unclear, like, where it came from, because The first time that this letter was brought up was in a Barbara Walters special in 2015. And she said that the letter had already been offered at trial as like a piece of evidence, but that it was excluded.
There was something the jury did not know about. It was given to me recently by a Menendez relative. The judge said the letter was not necessarily evidence of sexual abuse and ruled it inadmissible.
It turns out that that wasn't true, and it actually was never brought up at trial. I think you said that it's probably likely that they just sort of like gave her access to a bunch of material.
No, what I had imagined in my head is that Barbara Walters had, like, I don't know, gone to interview Marta Cano, Andy's mother, right? And then Marta was like, oh, yeah, like, feel free to, like, go through, like, my son's belongings and just, like, see what you can find, right? This is what I'm picturing in my head. I don't know if this actually happened.
Right, because this was after Andy had died.
Yeah, I'm assuming that happened. They found the letter, and then Marta probably said, oh, like, maybe Marta was thinking of another piece of evidence and was like, oh, wait, no, they already tried using that in the trial and it didn't do anything, or it didn't work, or they wouldn't allow it. What happened afterwards in the timeline after that?
In Lyle's declaration, he says, like, I heard about the Barbara Walters special. She said that it wasn't a new piece of evidence, so I didn't think about it anymore.
Then it skipped to, in early 2018, I was advised that my trial counsel, Jill Lansing, had said she had no recollection of any such letter being offered at trial and excluded.
Right.
Somehow Jill found out about the letter and then was like, no, I don't know what that is. And then the other lawyers were contacted and were like, no, we've never heard of it. And then Robert Rand went to, obtain a copy of the letter, I think.
Because it was 3 years between when this Barbara Walters special came out in 2015 and 2018 when they sort of put the pieces together that this actually was new evidence.
There's something missing. Something happened at some point.
The way that that's phrased, it seems like Jill Lansing is probably still, like, in contact with Lyle.
That's what I thought as well.
It could have just, like, come up in conversation, or, like, Jill Lansing reached out to the family to be like, I just saw this thing, like, I've never heard about it.
Yeah.
I think that if that had been presented at trial, they wouldn't have excluded it. There's certain, like, rules for what you can exclude and what you can't exclude, and I think that, like, a physical piece of evidence like that would not have been allowed to not be presented.
Yeah, because that comes from before the parents' deaths, and I believe, do you remember the 17-page letter in which, like, Lyle is saying, like, no one knows, like, the secrets of our family, and, like, I don't look forward to, like, broadcasting it?
Yeah.
I believe they tried to get that in the second trial, and, like, for whatever reason, like, it wasn't admissible as evidence, but yeah, unlike that, because that 17-page letter was written when, I believe, like, not too long after they both arrived in jail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Andy's letter comes from before the parents' deaths, so that's pretty strong corroboration.
Yeah.
But with this, though, does come a bunch of questions about why did it take so long for this letter to come out? And I'm sure the lawyers who are, like, managing this and dealing with this behind the scenes have already gone through all of this. My theory on it is that Andy is 3 years younger than Erik. Erik was 18 at the time of the killings, which means that Andy must have been at least 15 years old when Erik wrote the letter to him. Now, in my head, I can see a 15-year-old who gets this letter from his cousin, maybe reads it a bit. Like, the letter doesn't specifically mention abuse, but Andy knows that Erik has this sort of relationship with his father, right? So I can see him, like, reading the letter at the end of 1988 and then just putting it away with, like, a bunch of his other belongings. And then when Erik does kill his parents, I can easily see it, like, sort of slipping his mind that he actually has a letter that directly mentions something like that.
Well, it's actually interesting because, like, recently I've been going through some of my personal belongings from my childhood, and it's so crazy how, like, much I didn't remember of stuff that I, like, intentionally chose to keep. So, like, it doesn't really surprise me that even though this letter would have been and is, like, hugely important to their case, that, like, Andy wouldn't remember that it was specifically mentioned.
Yeah, and I think the age thing is very important to keep in mind. Like, Andy was 15 years old. Like, I don't know about you, but, like, can you remember, like, the gap in time between age 15 and age 18? And think of, like, what a completely different person you are, like, at those two different ages, right? I think when you're 18, like, there's a lot about being 15 years old that you don't really remember too well. So I don't think it's, like, unlikely that Andy simply just would have been like, I don't think Erik mentioned anything like that in his letters to me.
According to Lyle's declaration, it took around until, like, late 2020 for them to actually confirm that this was a new piece of evidence. And then at that point, Robert Rand was already, like, going through his interviews with people, I think probably around the time of his book, and that he had, like, some leads on other potential new evidence, aka the Menudo connection. And they decided to wait until, like, Robert Rand had finished this investigation of the Menudo evidence to, like, actually put it forward into any kind of, like, legal petition so that they could put them together.
Oh, okay, I see. So, like, Cliff Gardner advised the brothers, like, you should probably wait until Robert Rand has finished investigating everything until we actually submit this petition.
Right. I just found this interesting because I think at the time that we recorded, or we, like, talked about this letter before, there were, like, a lot of news articles and stuff out being like, there's new evidence in the Menendez case, like, here's this letter that was never presented at trial, but, like, it took them a while to, like, actually put that into a court claim, and so I think at the time, I was slightly skeptical.
Yeah.
Because I was like, if this is actually new evidence, why aren't they doing anything about it? Because, like, this would be really big. So maybe there's, like, something wrong with the letter, or it's, like, not actually new evidence.
I mean, but now we have the explanation for why that is, and it's because they were waiting. Before we finish talking about the letter, one other piece of the habeas corpus petition that I thought was interesting is Robert Rand's declaration. And it speaks about how he actually went about, like, authenticating the time in which the letter was written. I think we've mentioned before that, like, within the letter, Erik is talking about a Christmas party that his father is hosting for his work colleagues at the Menendez mansion in Beverly Hills. Robert Rand actually decided to, like, interview former employees of live entertainment to sort of, like, authenticate that, like, okay, did this happen? They confirmed it, and I think one of them even gave him a photograph, and in the photograph it shows a bunch of live entertainment employees sitting on the stairs of the Menendez mansion.
Yeah, so that's, like, confirmation that there actually was this Christmas party at the house, or, like, at the time that Erik was talking about it in the letter.
Yeah.
So the second piece of evidence that is, like, talked about in the habeas corpus petition is that there's a new victim of Jose's who has come out. His name is Roy Rosello, and he was a member of Menudo, which is the boy band that Jose was an executive of the record company, right?
RCA, I believe.
RCA?
Yeah.
So he was, like, very connected to this band. And Rosello has made allegations that Jose sexually assaulted him on 2 separate occasions. And these allegations came out in a documentary that came out earlier this year.
It's time for the world to know the truth.
In a new docuseries called Menendez Menudo Boys Betrayed, former Menudo band member Roy Rosello says he was molested by then head of RCA Records, Jose Menendez.
I know what he did to me in his house.
Rosello performed with the iconic Puerto Rican boy band from the age of 13 to 16. The group, known for giving Ricky Martin his start, was formed and managed by Edgardo Diaz. Rosello says Diaz also sexually abused him, and at one point brought him to Menendez's New Jersey home, where he says Menendez drugged and raped him.
That's the man here that raped me. This guy, that's the pedophile.
How old were you there?
14 years old.
I would recommend that people watch this documentary, first of all. Essentially, what Roy Rosello says is that he joined Menudo and was essentially, like, selected by the manager, whose name is Edgardo Diaz. Rosello was continuously, like, sexually abused by Diaz while he was in the band.
Yeah. There are also, like, numerous other allegations against Diaz by other people.
I don't know, the whole band, the whole Menudo concept is just creepy to me.
Yeah.
He was, like, picking attractive young boys who were, like, good dancers and singers to, like, be in this band, and then they would, like, age out. They could only be in the band if they were between, like, 13 and 16, I think.
Something like that.
They would, like, get replaced once they got too old.
Yeah.
Which, like, he literally, like, crafted this band around, like, his sexual perversions is, ugh.
Yeah. I'll just go, like, step by step as to, like, what is in the declaration by Roy.
Trigger warning for this section, graphic description of sexual abuse and rape. If you'd like to skip this section, just skip ahead 3 minutes.
So he says, one evening at the hotel, Mr. Diaz told me I would be having dinner with Jose Menendez, who was an RCA executive. Diaz said I was going to, in quotation marks, do a favor, and also again in quotes, do something great for Menudo and for him. I was taken in a limousine to Jose Menendez's house. As I recall, it was in New Jersey. Jose Menendez was in the limousine, as was Edgardo Diaz. After arriving at the Menendez home, I saw one of his boys sitting behind the front door. I was directed to the dining room. Another boy was at the dining room table. Neither of the boys said anything to me. Jose Menendez was there along with his wife, as was Edgardo Diaz. Jose Menendez offered me a glass of wine at the table and told me it was expensive wine, so I should drink the entire glass. I felt sick after drinking it. Things looked blurry and I felt like I could not move. I was partially pushed and partially carried down a hallway. It felt like I had no control over my body. Jose took me to a room. He closed the door. I could not move my body. He put me into a bed. I felt him take off my pants and felt him penetrate me in the arse. I think that I told him that I did not want to do this, but he continued to rape me in the anus very hard. I recall being carried back to the limousine. Later I woke up in the hotel where the group was staying. I was bleeding from the anus. I was in pain for a week. The pain was unbearable. Edgardo Diaz said I would be better soon and this was normal. I accused Diaz of selling my body to Jose Menendez. He told me not to mention this to anyone. So that is incident number 1. It's pretty horrific.
Yeah, it's awful. From my impression from the documentary, it seemed like the next day they signed the RCA contract, or it was like very close to the time of this incident. I viewed it as like a transactional thing.
Oh God, I hate reading this. Roy goes on to say, this was not my only sexual experience with Jose Menendez. I recall a time Menudo was performing in New York. I think we were at Radio City Music Hall. Before the show, Edgardo Diaz told me to meet Jose Menendez in the bathroom for oral sex. When I went to the bathroom, fans were already in the audience screaming. I recall Jose Menendez telling me that the fans were screaming because he made the group famous. Jose Menendez then orally copulated me. After that show, Edgardo Diaz said he had a last favor to ask. He asked me to go with Jose Menendez to a hotel. I went with Jose Menendez in a limousine to a hotel. It was not the hotel the group was staying at. I do not recall the name of the hotel, but I do recall that it was old-fashioned. Jose Menendez took me to a room and told me he was going to rape me slowly so it did not hurt. He put me on a bed, took my pants off, put saliva on my anus and penetrated me. When he was done raping me, he took me back to my hotel afterwards. He opened the door to the limousine and said goodbye.
So, it's pretty awful.
It's hard. It's like, what do you say, right? This is the man that was raising Erik and Lyle.
Yeah. As someone who has been invested in this case and done a lot of research about this case for a long time, this is not that surprising, but, like, the details of it are just disgusting.
Yeah, if I can be crude just for a minute, this is the type of stuff where I think, like, if, like, most normal people who only have ever heard about the Menendez brothers through the media, if they were to read this, I think they'd probably think to themselves, wow, I'd kill them too.
Yeah.
But this is the type of stuff where I'm like, this is what people don't hear and what people don't know about this case.
Right. And I mean, like, this is just one of the Menudo boys, and I would say I wouldn't be surprised if other members came out with other allegations.
I mean, other members have said that they were, like, assaulted and trafficked by, like, higher-ups, right?
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the Ricky Martin stuff?
I was gonna say, I think we should probably mention it.
Something that has been circulating in the Menendez sphere for a while is that Jose was connected to this band. And Menudo is where Ricky Martin got his fame.
Ricky Martin was also someone who was in Menudo at the same time as Roy Rosello.
Ricky Martin has never confirmed or spoken about any abuse happening to him. But there were some allegations brought by other people that mentioned Ricky Martin, but he denied all those allegations.
Wasn't, like, Ricky Martin also asked, like, if he knew Jose, and he denied that he even knew Jose, right?
Right, yeah.
But we know that's not true, because there is a photograph. I don't know what the photo is of, but it has, like, the band Menudo. Roy Rosello is in it. Edgardo Diaz is in it. Jose Menendez is in it. And Ricky Martin is in it as well. So, like, they did know of each other.
Yeah, there's this, like, tabloid article. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so, yeah.
Should we talk about that? It's always a little iffy when it's like...
I'm worried about the legality of it.
Yeah.
I get what you mean. Like, I'm kind of, like, when you're talking about stuff like that, I was kind of worried about, like, the legality of it, or, like, what can you say and not say, what's, like, slander or what's not slander.
Yeah. Let's just say there have been rumors swirling for many years about Jose's connections to Menudo and to Ricky Martin. So that's part of why, like, this isn't that surprising to me that one of the Menudo members has confirmed Jose's connection to the band.
Yeah.
Do we want to say anything else about Ricky Martin?
If people want to know our opinions, then just we'll reply on Instagram. That's an easy way of getting around it.
Putting Ricky Martin aside, the fact that Roy Rosello has come forward with allegations against Jose is really a very strong piece of evidence in the brothers' case. Because before this, the only people who had accused Jose of sexual assault were the brothers themselves.
Yeah. Because of, like, what we've learned, like, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, from learning about this case, you end up learning a lot about child abuse and also perpetrators of child abuse and incest. And it is very typical that abusers don't just abuse people within their own house. Like, it's very common that they're also abusing, like, children outside of the house as well. So I think we have mentioned before that, like, it probably is likely that there were more victims of Jose that we just don't know about. And Roy Rosello kind of confirms that.
I always viewed it as, like, Jose was peripherally connected to this band that had all these sexual abuse allegations. So, like, there's probably a connection there, but I don't know if we'll ever know that that's for certain. But I didn't think it was a coincidence.
Yeah.
And now this confirms that not only was he connected to this band, but that he was also involved in the abuse of the members of the band. So it wasn't a coincidence.
Yeah. But yeah, it's very, like, corroborative, right? It's, like, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. What could I possibly say to sort of argue against Roy's declaration or, like, his allegations? I feel like the only thing you could possibly say is that, I don't know, for some reason, he's just decided to make this all up for no reason, or attention, or...
I don't know. I mean, there were abuse allegations against the manager of the band going back to, like, the early 90s.
Yeah.
So, it's very strong evidence that the brothers were telling the truth. Which, if you've been listening to this podcast, you probably already know that that's what we think. But the general population doesn't think that, and I think that it's very good for the public perception of the brothers.
Yeah.
Just to hear that there's another victim, like, I think that people who don't know very much about this case would see that and be like, oh, okay, so they were molested.
Yeah. I also think it's just very hard to watch that documentary and not believe him. It's very strong corroboration. I mean, like, we've already discussed in our previous episodes why we think there's already very strong evidence that the brothers were telling the truth about being abused and molested. The fact that now we have confirmation from an outside witness who is not the brothers, was not a family member, was not a friend, but someone who knew Jose, who is now claiming the exact same things that the brothers said that their father was capable of. That's very strong evidence that they were telling the truth about that.
I agree.
Like, Rosello's claims now contradict one of the lead prosecutors' arguments.
Right. So, the way that the writ of habeas corpus uses this new evidence is to contradict claims that prosecutor David Kahn made in his closing argument in the second trial. So, with the Andy Kanu letter, this directly contradicts David Kahn saying that Andy was lying. And it also contradicts David Kahn saying that the abuse never happened. And then with the Roy Rosello claim, the writ talks about how this contradicts David Kahn saying that Jose was, quote, not a violent and brutal man, and was not the type of man to abuse children. So that's sort of how they use these pieces of evidence in the writ.
Yeah. I've also seen I mean, they're probably biased because they're a defense attorney, but I can't remember her name, but I saw her on a podcast, and I think she said, like, in multiple interviews that she thinks the writ of habeas corpus is actually pretty strong, which I thought was surprising. I thought it was just going to be like, oh yeah, it's like an average, like, writ of habeas corpus, but she thought it was, like, strong evidence.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's good to hear from, like, an actual lawyer.
Yeah. I feel like I'm immersed too deep in this case to know, like, how a court would view the writ.
Yeah.
But I would say I'm hopeful.
Cautiously
Hopeful.
Yeah.
What does this new evidence and this writ of habeas corpus actually mean for the brothers? So this was sent to the LA District Attorney, and they have to respond to this new evidence. In their writ, it asks them to consider this new evidence and either vacate the brothers' sentences, which would mean they would be released, or hold a new hearing or trial to include the new evidence in the brothers' convictions. So, do we want to talk about, like, what we think the DA is thinking right now?
It's hard to know. I remember thinking maybe it's just, like, normal that the DA would be taking, like, a long time to respond because they have to look over case files themselves, and, like, not only was it 2 separate trials, but both of those trials were very long.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of information that the DA has to review. But I'm assuming the judge, like, ordered the DA to investigate whether prosecutors did due diligence in investigating the abuse claims, right?
Right. So the DA has to explain why they didn't find this evidence earlier. Like, there were abuse claims against Menudo happening at the time of the trial, but, like, did the DA actually investigate if Jose was connected to that?
Yeah.
And did they actually look for, like, all of the evidence that they could about the abuse in Erik's letters and stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of just asking, like, hey, like, did your prosecutors actually do their jobs properly?
Right, because the way that trials work in the United States is, like, it's on the district attorney to prove that what they're saying is true. So they have to follow up with every possible piece of evidence that would say that they are not telling the truth. Now, you could say maybe they didn't look hard enough because they didn't want to prove that the brothers actually were abused.
I mean, the only information that we actually do have about this comes from one of the brothers' attorneys at the moment, Mark Garagos, has been doing a bunch of interviews about the habeas corpus petition. In one of them, I think it's his interview with Megyn Kelly, and he is on as a guest alongside former prosecutor, what's her name? Marsha Clark, who was the prosecutor in the OJ trial, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Marsha Clark, she was one of the lead prosecutors at the same time that the Menendez trials were going on. So she knew the prosecutors involved in the case. So she would have known Pamela Bozanich, Lester Kuriyama, Carol Nahara, and David Kahn. I'm assuming she was quite friendly with them. They are colleagues. But what she said in that interview was that, as far as she was aware, is that the prosecutors did try to investigate abuse claims, but that's all she knew about it. Now, I don't doubt that she was told that the prosecutors investigated the abuse claims. I don't necessarily believe that's true, though, because in the Menendez case, there was an overwhelming amount of family members, friends, teachers, coaches, who all testified for the defense. So that tells me that the prosecutors knew that there was merit to the abuse claims. They just didn't care because they were trying to convict the brothers. That's my opinion on it, at least. They were very aware of all these witnesses who were saying, yeah, we saw this, or we heard this, or the brothers themselves told me this, or the parents treated them like this, or oh, we had heard from other family members that this happened. There was just so much corroboration of abuse that, to me, it sounds ridiculous to even try and make the argument that prosecutors actively looked for evidence of abuse.
Right. Well, I think that, after the first trial, they knew that the abuse claims were very strongly corroborated, but that they also knew that they needed a conviction because they had just lost the OJ case. So they sort of just pushed forward anyways and started filing claims to remove all the corroboration for the brothers' allegations.
Yeah. The only information that we have directly from prosecutors regarding their investigation of abuse claims comes from it was after the brothers were sentenced in the second trial, right?
Yeah.
It was later on a Larry King show?
Right. It was in 2003, and the brothers' psychiatrist from when they were in jail, Dr. Vickery, was a guest, and so was prosecutor David Kahn from the second trial. And someone called in to the show. It says, quote, "My question is for the panel. I wanted to know if anyone is familiar with the rumor that Jose Menendez was an alleged serial child molester. And I just wanted to know if anyone has ever come forward to substantiate that." And Dr. Vickery said, quote, "There were allegations and they were investigated. They were followed up. People were interviewed and admitted that they had been either molested or approached by the father sexually. However, because of their position, some of these people were in the entertainment business. They did not wish to make this a public statement." And then David Kahn said, quote, "We saw no reliable evidence during the trial that that was true. We heard about that rumor, and I don't think that was substantiated." So, to me, this is talking about Menudo. It's possible there were other people in the entertainment industry who were abused by Jose, but as far as we know, Menudo is the main connection. And especially because there were already abuse allegations about the band out at the time of the brothers' trials, I think they're probably talking about Menudo. So either they heard about it and didn't really look into it because they didn't want to look into it because it could corroborate the defense, or they actually did look into it and no one would come out publicly, so they didn't bring it into the trial.
I mean, that's sort of what Dr. Vickery said, right? Is that, they knew of this, but these people just did not want to, like, actually publicly, like, come out and say it on TV, basically.
Right. But I'm not sure how that factors in to, like, the prosecutor's role in this. Like, if they had these allegations, but, like, people weren't willing to come forward with them, does that mean that, like, how I don't know how the prosecution was supposed to take that. Because to me, that's, like, very strong corroboration that David Kahn's claims about the abuse not being true, or that Jose was not the type of man to abuse children. Like, the fact that there are these claims out there, even if people aren't willing to testify about them, that's pretty strong evidence that he's lying.
Yeah.
But now we do have someone who has put into the public abuse claims, so.
Yeah. It is kind of a shame that it's taken over 30 years, but better late than never.
I mean, as we've discussed many times, and I think is well known now, like, it takes an average of 30 years for a male victim to admit that he's been sexually abused. So, I don't think that that diminishes the value of these allegations at all.
Yeah. What do you think George Gascon actually thinks about all of this? Because I believe Lyle's wife has actually mentioned that, like the 90-day extension they have is, like, kind of good because it gives them more time to actually negotiate with the DA's office. So I'm wondering, like, what would George Gascon want to do in this situation?
Right. Oh, George Gascon is the LA DA, for those who don't know. Yeah, I mean, I remember when he was elected, I was very excited because he's a very progressive prosecutor, and he had put out sort of his guidelines for, like, how he was going to be as a district attorney, and it was very pro-victim.
He was quite, like, pro, like, restorative justice as well, right?
Right. So I think that it's possible that he could look at this and just vacate their sentences. I think he, out of many other district attorneys, is more likely to do it.
Yeah. Like, if there was going to be one district attorney who would do this, it would be him.
My only thinking is, like, the public image of releasing them.
Yeah.
Like, even though I think morally he would look at this and know that they were telling the truth and know that they should be released, the public view of him is also important if he wants to be, like, reelected, or, like, if he thinks that this could, like, destroy his image. I don't know if he would do it.
Yeah. I wonder what what do you think people like Carol Nahara and Bazanich and Kuriyama are thinking about all of this?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like for so long they've, like, held their views, and, like, especially Bazanich, like, in documentaries and stuff. I don't know. I feel like at a certain point she just has to admit she was wrong.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think Kuriyama just, like, outright refuses, like, to be interviewed about the case. Like, I think the last documentary he did on the case was, like, back in the 90s. Why that is, who knows? And then Carol Nahara makes it pretty clear that she, like, doesn't believe them, but also she has also, like, played devil's advocate when she's being interviewed in documentaries and said, like, oh, well, if this was true, it still doesn't mean that it's not first-degree murder, right? But I feel like when you're at that age, it's pretty hard to, like, at least from my experience, I think when you see people who are above the age of, like, 40, they're pretty set in their opinions and views, and it's pretty hard. Like, even you could show them facts, and it wouldn't change their opinion. But I could be wrong. Maybe she does feel differently about it now. As far as we know, the last documentary she was in, like, a couple years ago, she still seemed, like, pretty anti the brothers. So,
I mean,
yeah.
I feel like if you were a prosecutor prosecuting a case, like, it would look pretty bad if you, after the case, like, turned around and changed your mind, you know?
Like, I don't understand what's so bad about, like, a prosecutor being, like, in a case like this saying, yeah, like, of course it doesn't excuse their actions and we still need to prosecute them, but considering all of the available evidence and information, like, they shouldn't get the harshest penalties. Like, it reminds me of, I think someone posted about this in the Menendez subreddit. he's out of prison now. It was a guy who, like, in his 40s, yeah, I believe he was in his 40s at the time, or like late, yeah, I want to say 40s. He like tracked down his like childhood molester and killed him with the help of a friend. And I believe he got like some form of manslaughter and got like not that many years. But I remember seeing the prosecutor's interview about it, and like you could just see it in their face. They were like, given all of the evidence that was presented, we think this sentence is suitable. So I was like, why can't we have more prosecutors like that?
My summary is I feel like George Gascon, who's the new LADA, is like a much better judge of this case than the situation at the time.
Probably a better judge of the case than biased prosecutors.
Right. My hope is that he will take the new evidence and see that this is really not a first-degree murder case, and that they shouldn't have been in prison for as long as they have been, and grant them release. I think that's the ideal. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, we should know, like, within the next year, because when that 90-day extension was... Like, when was the 90-day extension? It was a while ago now, wasn't it?
Like a month ago, maybe?
I want to say we've got, like, 2 months until we hear from the DA. I want to say, roughly.
Yeah.
As of this recording, which is on...
beginning of August.
Yeah.
So, we should have news this year. I'm not sure exactly what the news will be, but I think this is probably, like, one of the best opportunities they've had in, like, their legal case in a long time.
Yeah, this is definitely, like, one of the best chances.
Yeah, so that's our analysis of all the new information that's come out recently and the new court documents. Thanks for listening. We're planning on continuing to record some other episodes about the trials, going into some of the parts of this case that we haven't covered yet. So be on the lookout for those coming up.
If you'd like to hear more detailed opinions about what we think about things relating to Menudo, if you have any questions surrounding that, then feel free to like ask that on Instagram. There are certain reasons why we couldn't get into it in this video. Hey, thanks for listening, guys.